Bruce Springsteen, age 5. Could barely reach the mic. What happened next made judges stand up. 22 acts had already performed at the Freehold Community Center talent show. A 17-year-old who could play guitar like Buddy Holly. A barbershop quartet that had won 3 county competitions. A tap dancing trio with matching sequined outfits and professional choreography. And then there was contestant number 23, a 5-year-old boy who could barely see over the microphone stand. When the backstage coordinator called, "Bruce Springsteen, you're up." Some people in the audience actually laughed. Not mean laughter exactly, more like, "Oh, that's cute" laughter. The kind that says, "This isn't going to be serious competition." The 3 judges exchanged looks. They'd been sitting through this all day, and they were exhausted. They wanted to get to the real contenders, get through the amateurs and find someone with actual star potential. "What song are you singing, sweetheart?" One judge asked in that tone adults use when they're being patronizing without meaning to be. "That'll be the day," Bruce said, his voice so quiet the judge had to ask him to repeat it. "From Buddy Holly?" The judge smiled. "That's a very hard song, honey." "Are you sure you know all the words?" Bruce nodded. "Okay then, whenever you're ready." Nobody in that room was ready for what came next. September 15th, 1954. Freehold Community Center, New Jersey. The annual Monmouth County Youth Talent Showcase was a big deal in central New Jersey. It wasn't just about the $25 prize money, though that certainly mattered to working families like the Springsteens. It was about exposure. Local radio DJs from WJLK served as judges. The winner got airplay on the biggest station in Monmouth County. For aspiring musicians in blue-collar New Jersey towns like Freehold, this was the golden ticket. The Springsteen family had arrived at 8:30 a.m., even though Bruce's slot wasn't until 2 p.m. Douglas Springsteen didn't believe in taking chances. Early meant getting to know the layout, understanding the acoustics, and watching the competition. 5-year-old Bruce had spent the morning watching act after act, his eyes getting wider with each performance. These weren't kids singing in their backyards or church choirs. These were real performers with genuine talent, competition-level talent. "Daddy," Bruce whispered during one particularly impressive singer, "everyone's so good." "You're better," Douglas said flatly. It wasn't comfort. It was a statement of fact. "You just need to prove it." Adele squeezed Bruce's small hand. "Remember what we practiced, honey? Sing from your heart. Make them feel what you feel." Bruce's older sister Virginia sat nearby, equally nervous. This was technically Bruce's solo entry, but it was really an audition for the entire family's dreams. If Bruce impressed the judges, maybe Douglas could finally quit the construction job that was destroying his back. Maybe Adele could stop taking in laundry to make ends meet. This was their shot at something better. At 1:45 p.m., the coordinator called Bruce's name for the pre-stage check. They needed to set his microphone height and get his introduction card filled out. When they saw how small he was, the coordinator hesitated. "Honey, how old are you?" "5 years old." "Are you sure you want to do this? There are some really talented older kids competing today. Some of them have been taking lessons for years." "I'm sure," Bruce said, his voice small but steady. The coordinator looked at Douglas, who'd followed them backstage. "Sir, I just want to make sure he understands this is a real competition. The judges can be, well, they're honest. I'd hate to see him get his feelings hurt." "He'll be fine," Douglas said. "Just make sure the microphone is at the right height." The 3 judges sat at a table in front of the small stage. Frank DeMarco, 48, was a DJ at WJLK and had been in the music business since he was 16. He'd heard thousands of performers. He could spot real talent in the first 10 seconds of any performance. Margaret Peggy O'Brien, 42, ran a local music school, and had trained half the performers competing that day. She had impossibly high standards and wasn't afraid to score harshly if someone wasn't ready for serious competition. Tony Benedetto, 55, owned the biggest record store in Freehold and knew what sold records. He cared less about technical perfection and more about star quality, that indefinable something that made people want to listen. They were on hour 4 of the competition. They'd seen good singers, decent dancers, a surprisingly talented harmonica player, and more mediocre acts than they cared to remember. They were tired. They were ready for this to be over, so they could identify the real winner and go home. Number 23, the coordinator announced. Bruce Springsteen, age 5, performing That'll Be the Day. Peggy looked at her score sheet. 5? Did she say 5 years old? That's what it says here, Frank confirmed, checking his list. Tony leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. This should be interesting. The curtain opened. Bruce stood center stage, and several people in the audience actually said "aw" out loud. He was tiny, absolutely adorable, wearing a white dress shirt that was clearly borrowed from his father because the sleeves were rolled up multiple times. His black pants were too long, cuffed at the bottom. His shoes had been polished until they shined, but they were obviously hand-me-downs. His dark hair was slicked back with Brill cream in a style that made him look like a miniature adult. His eyes were huge and nervous, darting between the judges and the audience. The microphone stand had been lowered to its minimum height, and it was still almost at Bruce's eye level. He had to tilt his head up slightly to reach it properly. "Oh, honey," Peggy whispered to Frank. "This is going to be rough to watch." In the audience, Adele Springsteen held her breath. She could see how scared Bruce was, even from 10 rows back. Douglas sat perfectly still, his weathered face revealing nothing, but his jaw was tight with tension. Everything they dreamed about was riding on the next 3 minutes. Virginia leaned forward in her seat, fingers crossed so tightly her knuckles were white. "Whenever you're ready, Bruce," Peggy said encouragingly. She'd already decided to give him a gentle score, maybe a 4 out of 10. Enough to not crush his spirits, but honest enough to be fair to the teenagers who'd been training for years. The music started. The familiar opening guitar riff of That'll Be the Day, Buddy Holly's breakthrough hit that had been dominating radio stations across America. A song that required range, rhythm, and emotional understanding. A song that grown professionals struggled with. And this 5-year-old was about to attempt it. Bruce gripped the microphone stand with both tiny hands. His knuckles were white with concentration, the guitar introduction built toward his entrance cue. His moment was coming. He opened his mouth, and the Freehold Community Center forgot how to breathe. The voice that came out of Bruce Springsteen's small body was impossible. It was pure, crystal clear, with perfect pitch and natural rhythm. Not the cute, wavering singing of a child trying their best. This was something else entirely. That'll be the day when you say goodbye, Bruce sang, and the note was flawless. The tone was controlled, but more than that, there was genuine emotion in it. Real feeling that you couldn't fake or teach. Peggy's pen stopped moving on her score sheet. She just stared, mouth slightly open. Frank sat up straighter in his chair, his eyes narrowing in complete disbelief. Tony uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, suddenly very interested. In the audience, people who'd been chatting quietly or checking their programs stopped everything. Heads turned toward the stage in amazement. Bruce's initial nervousness was melting away with every note. This was what he'd been practicing for months in their small living room. This was what he heard in his head when he listened to the radio late at night. This was what his mother told him to feel in his heart. That'll be the day when you make me cry. His voice got stronger, more confident. He wasn't just singing the notes anymore. He was telling a story A 5-year-old child was conveying heartbreak and defiance in a way that made grown adults feel something stirring in their chests. Adele had tears streaming down her face. Her baby, her youngest child, he was doing it. He was actually doing it. Douglas's stone-faced expression finally cracked. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. Not quite a smile, but close. He'd known. Deep down, he'd always known Bruce had this gift. Virginia was frozen in her seat, watching her little brother command a stage in a way she'd never imagined possible. The song built toward its climax. This was the part where most singers struggled, where the notes got demanding and you needed both power and perfect control. The make-or-break moment that separated real talent from enthusiastic amateurs. That'll be the day when I die. Bruce's voice soared on the final phrase. He wasn't straining or forcing it. The high note came out like it was the most natural thing in the world, with a slight vibrato that you couldn't teach a child. It was pure instinct, pure musical genius. The backing track faded to its conclusion. Bruce held the final note with perfect control, then let it fade into silence. For a moment, the Freehold Community Center was completely silent. 200 people sat in absolute stunned quiet. Then it exploded. The audience leaped to their feet as one. The applause was deafening, overwhelming, mixed with shouting and cheering. Someone yelled, "Unbelievable!" A woman in the third row was openly crying. A man near the back was shaking his head in amazement, saying, "How is that possible?" Over and over. The backstage coordinator stood in the wings with her mouth hanging open, staring at this tiny boy who had just delivered a professional-level performance. At the judges' table, complete chaos. Peggy O'Brien had both hands covering her mouth in shock. Frank DeMarco was shaking his head in disbelief, his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Tony Benedetto was grinning like a man who'd just struck gold. Bruce stood on the stage, blinking in the bright spotlight, not quite understanding what was happening around him. The applause seemed to go on forever. Had he done okay? Did they like his song? "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank finally said into his microphone, his voice shaky with emotion. "I need everyone to quiet down for a moment." The applause gradually subsided, but the energy in the room remained electric. Frank looked directly at Bruce. "Son, how old did you say you were?" "5," Bruce said softly, his voice barely carrying to the judges. "5 years old," Frank repeated, as if saying it out loud would make it make sense. "How long have you been singing?" Bruce thought about it for a moment. "Always, I guess. Mama says I was humming along to the radio before I could talk properly. Who taught you to sing like that?" "Nobody taught me. I hear the songs on the radio and I sing along. I hear it in my head and then it comes out." Frank looked at his fellow judges. Peggy was nodding frantically, still in shock. Tony was already writing his score on his card, grinning broadly. "Bruce," Peggy said, her voice gentle but filled with excitement. "That was the most incredible thing I've heard in 25 years of teaching music. Do you understand that? You're 5 years old, and you just sang better than most professional adults I know." Bruce didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded politely. "Do you have any other songs prepared?" Tony asked, barely able to contain his enthusiasm. I know lots of songs. Elvis songs, Hank Williams, country music my dad likes. Pick your favorite right now. Sing it for us." Bruce thought for a moment, then his face lit up. "I really like Hound Dog. Elvis sings it, but I do it different." Frank gestured to the sound operator. "Can we get a backing track for Hound Dog?" What happened next was even more remarkable than his first song. Bruce performed Hound Dog with a confidence that seemed impossible for his age. He moved slightly to the rhythm, his tiny body swaying with natural timing that professional performers spent years trying to develop. This time, the audience was ready for him. They clapped along, shouted encouragement, and by the end of the song, half the room was on their feet dancing. Bruce fed off their energy, his voice getting stronger and more playful with each verse. When he finished, the applause was even louder than before. "I'm going to tell you something, Bruce," Tony said, standing up from the judges' table and walking onto the stage. "And I want you to remember this moment. You are going to be famous. I don't mean local famous. I mean really famous, national famous. Maybe even more than that." He turned to address Douglas and Adele in the audience. "Sir, ma'am, I want to talk to you after this competition ends. I know people in the music business, people who can help your son." Douglas stood up slowly, his face showing the first real emotion he displayed all day. Hope. The judging was unanimous. Bruce Springsteen won first place with perfect scores from all three judges. But more importantly, Tony Benedetto introduced the family to a promoter named Jimmy Roselli, who started booking Little Bruce Springsteen for paid performances around central New Jersey. Within 3 months, Bruce was performing at VFW halls, church socials, and community events throughout Monmouth County. Within 6 months, he had his own regular radio segment on WJLK. Within a year, people were driving from neighboring towns just to hear the boy wonder from Freehold. But it all started on September 15th, 1954, in a community center in New Jersey, when a 5-year-old boy who could barely see over the microphone stand taught a room full of skeptics that talent has no age requirement. Years later, Peggy O'Brien was interviewed for a local newspaper story about Bruce Springsteen's early life. "The moment he started singing," Peggy said, "I literally forgot he was 5 years old. His voice, his emotion, his natural rhythm and timing. It was like listening to someone who had been performing professionally for decades. I've taught music for 45 years. I've heard thousands of children sing. And I have never, before or since, heard anything like Bruce Springsteen at 5 years old," the interviewer asked. "What did you think when you first saw him walk onto that stage?" Peggy smiled. "Honestly, I thought this poor kid is about to embarrass himself in front of 200 people. I was ready to give him a gentle score and move on to the teenagers who actually had training and experience. I'd already decided he was too young, too small, too inexperienced to compete with the real performers. And then he opened his mouth, and I realized that everything I thought I knew about talent and age and experience was completely wrong. Bruce Springsteen didn't just sing that day. He taught every adult in that room a lesson about making assumptions. What was the lesson? That genius doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't care if you think someone's too young or too small or too anything. When it's real, when it's authentic, you can't deny it or explain it away. You can only witness it and feel grateful that you were there when it happened. The score sheet from that day still exists. It's in a private collection now, but it's been photographed and documented for music historians. Under Bruce Springsteen's name, in Peggy O'Brien's careful handwriting, there's a note that wasn't required by the competition. A note she added because she felt compelled to document what she'd witnessed. It reads, 5 years old. Sang That'll Be the Day and Hound Dog. This child is a miracle. Mark this date. We just met someone who's going to change the world of music. She was right. September 15th, 1954, was the day the world discovered Bruce Springsteen. They just didn't know it yet.